Imagine building a classification model that completely fails to identify its target variable, but the end users deploy it anyway purely as a mechanism to ban people they disagree with.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
Right. Welcome to AI Paper Slop. Today, we are tearing into a paper titled That's AI Slop, You Bot, studying accusations, evidence, and credibility in online discourse towards LLM-generated comments by Jason Micklien and John E. Katzins.
Such a great title.
It really is. And if you are an AI researcher or an ML engineer listening to this is the reality of how your models are actually being received in the wild. So the authors analyzed 25 million comments across Hacker News and Reddit from early 2023 to mid-2026.
A massive data set.
Huge. And they uncovered that accusations of, AI slop have skyrocketed by more than tenfold. But here's the massive twist for you in the machine learning community. Using a really rigorous matched control test, the researchers proved that the linguistic features that mathematically identify actual AI-generated text, they do not predict which human text gets accused of being AI.
Right. The accusation has zero screening accuracy.
Right. Zero. Instead, it survives purely as a tool for social gatekeeping and structural protest.
And, as engineers, you spend your time optimizing for fluent, human-like prose, right? Which essentially disrupts one of the oldest signals of cognitive effort that we have.
Yeah.
This paper meticulously maps out how the human immune system of the internet is reacting to that disruption. And the reaction isn't, some accurate deployment of lay heuristics to detect language models.
No, definitely not.
Right. It is the construction of a highly aggressive, completely new social hierarchy based entirely on paranoia and community policing.
Yeah, because the fluent prose signal has been so compromised, we really first have to look at the economic and psychological collapse of, good writing.
Right.
It used to be this really reliable metric of effort. If I am reading a well-crafted expository paragraph, I am implicitly trusting that the writer spent time, they had an education, and they exerted actual cognitive friction to produce it.
Exactly.
Generative AI fundamentally drove the computational and cognitive cost of that signal to absolute zero.
It did. And the researchers anchor this entirely in signaling theory. So in any biological or economic system, a costly signal guarantees authenticity because it's just too expensive for a bad actor to fake.
Like the peacock's tail, right?
Yes, the classic example. A peacock's tail takes massive metabolic resources to grow, so it reliably signals genetic health. And for centuries, polished written communication functioned the exact same way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But when a signal suddenly becomes completely cheap to mass produce, the receivers of that signal experience this acute crisis of trust.
Right. The intuitive response to a flooded market is just paranoia. I mean, it's like if the luxury watch market is suddenly inundated with flawless, zero-cost counterfeits, buyers don't just distrust the fakes.
They distrust everything.
Exactly. They scrutinize the genuine Rolexes with absolute suspicion because the baseline of trust has completely evaporated.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
But looking at this data, my first instinct as an engineer is to, check for drift in internet toxicity. I mean, discourse online has been degrading for a decade.
Oh, totally.
So the researchers must have accounted for the possibility that users are just getting generically more hostile over time, right? Rather than reacting specifically to LLMs.
Yeah, they did. Controlling for baseline toxicity was actually their first major methodological hurdle, and they solved it using this placebo vocabulary test.
Oh, interesting. How did that work?
So they tracked a specific set of inauthenticity terms that predate the release of ChatGPT, words like shill, astroturf, sock puppet, and paid actor.
Okay, the classics.
Right. And the logic is really straightforward. If the internet was merely experiencing a generic rise in paranoia or hostility, the frequency of those legacy terms should trend upward right alongside the AI accusations.
Ah, okay, so the data must show a divergence there. Otherwise, the core thesis kind of falls apart.
The divergence is absolute. Those placebo terms actually declined or remained entirely flat over the entire 41-month observation window.
Wait, really? They declined?
Yeah. On Reddit, those older terms fell from comprising about 8.3% of accusation-like speech in early 2023 to just 5.3% by 2026. And on Hacker News, the trend line was functionally horizontal.
Wow.
So that massive tenfold spike is an incredibly specific, newly evolved antibody response targeting AI specifically. And the scope of the data collection gives this finding immense weight.
Yeah, 25 million comments.
Right. Scanning 25 million comments across 18 diverse subreddits, that's spanning AI-focused boards, creative writing forums, general news, plus Hacker News.
There is also this beautiful, almost poetic irony in their methodology here. To ensure they were looking at genuine attacks and not just abstract discussions about machine learning, they actually used an LLM to validate a stratified sample of 7,500 specific accusations.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
They effectively deployed a language model to categorize human paranoia about language models.
It is deeply ironic, but the methodological design there is quite robust. They utilized the model to conduct semantic framing analysis, and they achieved a really high iterator reliability score against human coders.
So it actually worked well.
Extremely well. It allowed them to filter out noise, like someone just generally saying AI slop is a problem for the industry, and isolate instances where a user was directly attacking another user's text.
Got it. So since we know the paranoia is a specific validated response to AI, the next step is really dissecting how users are actually deploying these attacks, right?
Yeah.
Because it isn't just a binary flag where people hit a button that says bot. The researchers utilized a 137 pattern regex lexicon to capture the taxonomy of the discourse, and they broke the accusations down into 5 distinct tiers.
Right, and that stratification reveals a highly structured policing mechanism. So tier 1 is direct explicit claims like ChatGPT wrote this, or OP is a bot.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Then tier 2 is pejorative. This includes labels designed to demean, such as AI slop, GPT garbage, or robo-writing.
Okay.
Tier 3 is style. This is where users attempt to, reverse engineer the prompt by pointing out specific output artifacts, complaining about M-dashes, or fixating on words like delve or rich tapestry.
Oh, the delve police. We all know them.
Exactly. Then tier 4 is mocking, which involves parodying the model's safety guardrails with phrases like, as an AI language model.
Right.
And finally, tier 5 is indirect, which relies on sense-based identifications like, this smells like AI, or citing the uncanny valley of writing.
From a purely technical perspective, I would expect tier 3, those stylistic tells, to be the absolute dominant category, especially among technical crowds.
You think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, as ML engineers, we are constantly analyzing output artifacts. We know that certain fine-tuning datasets over-index on specific vocabulary. Calling out the word delve feels analytical. It mimics the act of debugging, yet the data points in a completely different direction.
It totally does. Tier 2, the pejorative labels, completely consume the landscape. When a user deploys a tier 2 phrase, the study found a 78% probability they are sincerely accusing the writer of using AI rather than just making a joke.
Wow, so they really mean it.
They absolutely mean it. Furthermore, we see extreme lexical consolidation within that pejorative bucket. So back in 2023, the community utilized a wide array of insults, right? Garbage, drivel, word salad, sludge.
Yeah, lots of variety.
Right. Those varied terms made up about 31% of pejorative hits. But by 2026, those legacy terms plummeted to 8%. The specific frame AI slop consolidated the market.
AI slop.
Yes. It now constitutes 94% of all pejorative mentions.
So the community's vocabulary underwent the linguistic equivalent of mode collapse in a generative adversarial network.
That is exactly what happened.
Instead of a diverse distribution of responses, the entire system just collapsed into a single, highly aggressive output because it was the most computationally cheap heuristic to execute.
Yes. Sociolinguists refer to this phenomenon as enregisterment theory. When a community needs to coordinate on a new signal to identify a threat, they naturally gravitate toward the token that minimizes coordination cost while maximizing mutual recognizability.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Right. Analyzing a paragraph for its preposition density or its use of formal adverbs that requires cognitive load, typing AI slop is frictionless.
It's just 2 words.
Exactly. It functions as a highly compressed speech act that accomplishes 3 things simultaneously. It identifies the target, it casts moral condemnation on the text as mass-produced waste, and it signals the accuser's in-group membership as an authentic human.
Right, because slop has become this universal, frictionless flag for the internet's immune system. The most critical question for our audience is whether this heuristic actually maps to the underlying data distribution.
Right. Is it accurate?
Yeah. If the community is highly motivated to catch bad actors, we need to know if their targeting is accurate.
Well, to test the accuracy of the mob, the researchers first had to establish the ground truth statistical markers of real AI text within these specific forums.
Okay, how did they find ground truth AI text in the wild?
They isolated a data set of text confirmed to be AI generated, either through explicit user disclosure or because the comment was demonstrably the raw output of an AI assistant pasted into the forum, like literally leaving the UI text in.
Ah, okay, so they knew for sure.
Exactly. They then ran a rigorous statistical feature analysis to identify the mathematical signature of the models.
Knowing how our models are trained, I am guessing those markers are largely artifacts of our safety fine-tuning.
Yep.
Our LHF optimizes for outputs that are helpful and harmless, which inadvertently forces the model into this sanitized, hyper-formal corporate register. It creates an aversion to conversational syntax.
The feature analysis confirms that entirely. Statistically, the real AI text in this dataset exhibited a 30% lower contraction rate compared to human baseline text.
30% lower, wow.
Yeah. It contained 2.3 times higher formal register adverbs, a 22% higher preposition density, and a massive 2.9 times higher sentence length variance.
So they're very distinct.
Extremely. The models produce highly structured expository bursts that systematically avoid the messy, abbreviated syntax typical of human internet comments. These proxy markers separate AI-generated text from human-written text with profound statistical significance.
Okay, so the models have a mathematical fingerprint. They write formally, they avoid contractions, and they structure their paragraphs with rigid variants. With that baseline established, the researchers set up the definitive test, right?
The match control test.
Yes. They took 421 human comments that were actively accused by the community of being AI slop. They then built a matched control sample of 2,048 non-accused human comments. And that matching here is crucial. They controlled for the exact same length, posted in the exact same subreddit at the exact same time.
Right, taking all the contextual variables out of the equation.
Exactly. So what happened?
They ran a logistic regression to determine if the statistical markers that reliably identify real AI text could predict whether a human user receives an accusation. The hypothesis being that if the crowd is accurately detecting AI, the accused human comments should mathematically resemble AI text more closely than the non-accused control group.
And the logistic regression output is just a total null result.
Complete null. None of those statistical markers predict whether a human gets accused.
That is staggering.
It really is. The features that actually distinguish a language model from a human writer have virtually zero relationship with the text the mob decides to flag. The lay heuristics used by readers are systematically miscalibrated.
It is the exact mechanism of a broken spam filter. I mean, imagine writing a classification algorithm to catch malicious payloads, but instead of analyzing the executable code, the filter just sends every email that uses proper punctuation and complex vocabulary straight to the junk folder.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
The mob isn't detecting synthetic text. They are penalizing articulate expression. If you naturally write polished, expository English, you are caught in the crossfire. You are being sanctioned simply because your cognitive effort resembles the zero-cost output of a language model.
And that miscalibration presents a massive paradox for classical signaling theory.
How so?
Well, the theory dictates that if a population coordinates on a substitute signal, in this case, the accusation of slop, to weed out fakes, that substitute signal must possess some degree of accuracy to survive in the ecosystem.
Right. If a predator uses a flawed heuristic to hunt, it starves and the heuristic dies out.
Exactly. But here, the accusation is mathematically blind, yet its prevalence has grown by over 1,000%.
So because the accusation has zero predictive power for actually detecting language models, its exponential growth has to be fueled by something else entirely. It isn't performing technical work, it is performing social work.
You hit the nail on the head. The paper proves this transition by conducting a qualitative coding of 300 confirmed accusations, tracking the evolution of the underlying speech acts across the timeline.
Okay, what did the timeline show?
The data reveals a massive migration in the utility of the accusation. So in early 2023, approximately 26% of the accusations were categorized as mere mockery. Users were pointing out obvious bot failures and having a laugh at the technology's expense.
That reflects the early adoption honeymoon phase, right, where the failures of the models are viewed as novelties rather than systemic threats.
Exactly. But the landscape shifted dramatically by 2026. Mockery plummeted to just 7%.
Wow.
Yeah. Taking its place was a category the researchers label structural protest, meaning the user is objecting to AI as a general societal phenomenon, regardless of the specific text's origin. That category tripled to nearly 39%.
So it became a political statement.
Yes. Simultaneously, accusations functioning as gatekeeping, enforcing community rules, asserting dominance, and defining in-group status rose to 16.5%. The deployment of the word slop decoupled entirely from the task of identifying a language model.
it morphed into a blunt instrument for collective political action and boundary maintenance.
Right. It is a rapid, unassailable way to tell another user, you do not belong in this community.
You know, a really fascinating demographic detail emerges for our specific audience when looking at who pioneered this social behavior. The researchers isolated Hacker News from the broader Reddit aggregate. Across the entire 41-month window, Hacker News consistently led Reddit's accusation trajectory by 2 to 4 percentage points.
Yeah, that differential is a textbook diffusion model.
How's that work?
Well, the highly technical early adopters on Hacker News, the software engineers, the machine learning researchers listening to this right now, they encountered the capabilities and the disruptiveness of LMs significantly earlier than the general public. They experienced the collapse of the good Prose signal first. Consequently, they developed the paranoia first, they engineered the accusation norms, and those norms subsequently bled out into the mainstream internet on a 12 to 18-month delay.
So the technical community essentially prototyped and open-sourced the witch-hunting tools.
Pretty good.
Because this accusation has become a tool for social dominance rather than actual bot detection, it is creating a bizarre new type of collateral damage. The researchers frame this through the philosophical lens of epistemic injustice.
Yeah, this is a really important concept here.
Usually in our field, when we discuss AI and epistemic injustice, we are focused on algorithmic bias, right? A model deflating someone's credibility based on flawed training data, or a system denying a loan based on an opaque, automated decision. We worry about the machine harming the human.
Right, but this paper demonstrates a total inversion of that dynamic. The harm is flowing horizontally.
Human to human.
Exactly. Lay AI literacy is manifesting as human-to-human testimonial injustice. Testimonial injustice occurs when a speaker is wronged in their capacity as a knower when their credibility is unfairly deflated by the listener's prejudice.
In this context, the readers are facing a detection task that is, at the lay level, completely unsolvable. They do not have access to the model weights, they cannot see the generation API logs, and as the matched control test proved, their internal heuristics are completely miscalibrated.
And faced with a structural incapacity to solve the detection problem, the community resorts to blanket distrust. They weaponize the Slop accusation to silence people they disagree with, or people who simply write no formal register.
Yeah.
It results in innocent, articulate humans being systematically stripped of their credibility, their status, and their voice, and ultimately being exiled for the discourse.
You know, the default instinct for an ML engineer looking at this dynamic is to build a technical solution. We assume that if the human heuristics are miscalibrated, we just need to deploy a highly accurate AI detection classifier to moderate the forums. But based on the shift toward structural protest, building a flawless detection API won't resolve the social dynamic at all.
No, not at all. Technical solutions cannot resolve social imperatives. The accusation's fitness, its survival value in the ecosystem, is derived from its utility in boundary maintenance and status signaling, not from its accuracy.
That's a really bleak thought.
It is. I mean, you could integrate a mathematically perfect cryptographic watermark into every language model tomorrow, and users would still accuse each other of posting slop.
Because they just want to win the argument.
Exactly. The objective of the accusation is no longer to find the synthetic text. The objective is to win the argument, to enforce ideological boundaries, and to gatekeep the community. The phenomenon documented here is not a deficit of technical detection. It is a fundamental collapse of epistemic infrastructure.
Wow. We have really traced a remarkable cascade of unintended consequences today. Generative models drove the cost of fluent prose to zero, which triggered an explosive tenfold rise in slop accusations across digital platforms. Through rigorous match control testing, we saw that these accusations are mathematically blind to actual AI text, acting instead as a miscalibrated filter that penalizes polished human writers.
Yeah.
And finally, we observed how technical communities pioneered this new form of social gatekeeping, shifting from early mockery into hardened structural protest to violently defend the boundaries of human effort.
And the paper leaves us confronting a very fragile ecosystem for written communication where trust is entirely decoupled from the actual content of the text.
So as ML engineers and researchers, you are currently dedicating massive compute and optimization resources to make models even more seamlessly human-like. You are actively working to strip away the remaining technical tells, smoothing out the sentence length variance, injecting conversational contractions, and masking the formal adverbs. But if the findings of this paper hold, the fewer technical tells the AI exhibits, the more aggressive the social gatekeeping becomes. Paranoia simply expands to fill the void left by certainty. So I want to leave you with this thought. Are we engineering our way toward a future where the qualitative value of text no longer matters at all, where the only mechanism for trust is a verified cryptographic proof of human identity attached to every single keystroke? Think about what that paradigm shift does to the open, anonymous internet architecture we all grew up with. Thanks for listening to AI Peeperslop.